What's up, everybody? Jeff here, and today we are finally making it to the last faction in Malifaux, and that is the Outcasts. So what we're here to do is help you pick out which of the Outcast Masters is the one that appeals most. If you're not sure that Outcast is your faction, then be sure to check out a similar video that I did that helps you pick out the faction in Malifaux that you like the best. And if you decide to go with something else, then I have already done every other faction in the game, where we go through and cover each of the Masters. We talk a little bit about their lore and backstory, a little bit about why the models are cool, and then I have my friends from the Danger Planet give us a little bit of information about how they play in the game. And while all that's going on, you'll be seeing pictures of pretty painted models and artwork that Weird has done for those models so that you can get a better sense of how they look and feel. I'm a big proponent of the rule of cool when you're trying to decide what you want to play in a miniatures game, so hopefully this will be a way that you can kind of make that decision in a little bit more of an informed way. If you find this video helpful, then make sure that you leave it a like and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stuff that I have coming up. And consider sharing it around with some folks who you think might be interested in playing some Outcasts, but maybe don't know which of the masters that they will like the best. You can also find a bunch of important links in the description below, including my Weird affiliate link where you can shop on their website and it supports the channel with any purchases that you make. In addition to the Discord where you can come over and chat with us about Malifaux and the hobby and other tabletop miniatures games and all sorts of other cool stuff. I also have my Ko-fi down there where you can leave me a quick tip to say thank you for the video, or my Patreon if you want to support the channel more regularly, and you can get all sorts of different benefits on a couple of different tiers. So definitely check that out. But with that, let's get into the Outcasts. Leopold VonShill was a soldier in the employ of the Guild in the early days of the breach reopening. He was a successful and well-respected soldier, but he soon became frustrated with the Governor General's disregard for the safety of his men. This pushed him to resign from the Guild, and many of the men under his command came with him as he formed the Freikorps. This mercenary outfit soon grew to be one of the finest in all of Malifaux, and it operated much like a military unit, with excellent training and equipment, but whose services were farmed out to the highest bidder. VonShill was known for leading from the front, which led to many injuries and a difficult life for the old soldier. When the Governor General died and he was replaced by Governor General Marlowe, the new leader decided that the Guild could not allow mercenary work to continue. They passed a law making it illegal, and Marlowe gave VonShill an ultimatum. He and his men could come back to the Guild and help them maintain peace and order in the city, or he could be declared a criminal. VonShill took the latter option and quickly organized the rest of the Outcasts to move to a place far from Malifaux City, where they could continue plying their trade, and the Guild would have a hard time reaching them. They called this settlement Freihold, and while the Guild has been too preoccupied to come stop them, they've faced many difficulties of their own. VonShill is a gruff old man who's had most of his body replaced with mechanical parts, but he's the kind of guy that you have to respect for standing up for his principles, and even though he's kind of old and crotchety, he's still a badass. The Freikorps are a really interesting unit because they're all really well equipped and well trained, especially compared to something like the Guild. And they even have a bunch of interesting stuff in their crew, like Lazarus, who's a construct who has a vendetta against the Guild. They've got flamethrower troopers, snipers, mages, and they all specialize in using their weapons and equipment to outpace their opponents. But with that, let's go over to Brandon from the Danger Planet, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how VonShill and the Freikorps work on the table.
Leopold VonShill leads the mercenary outfit known as the Freikorps, a sturdy crew with lots of guns and armor that have the right tools for any given situation and rely on the upgrades given out by VonShill himself to pack an extra punch. There are 5 different upgrades that his crew has that are given out during play rather than being purchased during crew selection, and all of them have a special benefit or an ability or an attack that the upgraded model can use, although once used, they'll usually fall off and sometimes they get passed to nearby models to be used again. The crew has 2 amazing henchmen that you will almost always see on the table. Eric, who is a beater that can customize his activation with his bonus action charge up to either be a little more defensive or to deal better damage from either his melee attack or his shockwave. And he has the excellent ability Gravity Well, which completely stops any place effects from your opponent's models anywhere near him. Hannah, the other henchman, is a beefy robo lady who can do pretty good damage either up close or at range. She can copy the tactical actions that friendly models have, usually Eric's, to make her fists extra spicy, and she gives you an extra card in your hand as long as she's alive from her arcane reservoir. The crew also has access to 5 different soldier minions who cover any role that you needed, from damage to healing to tools for the job and support, and excellent marker removal. Regardless of who you're playing, there's going to be someone that you can hire to deal with anything your opponent can bring to bear. VonShill 1 is a support master who can put damage out if he needs to, but mostly he spends at least the early turns gearing up himself and his crew along with his trusty sidekick and totem, his steam-powered equipment footlocker. But VonShill Ironheart is a melee dive master who rushes in, punches faces, and bulldozes through any obstacle in his way. He also throws all of his used gear upgrades at friendly models and shields them when he does, and he can take 2 bonus actions a turn to boot. The Frycorps are a toolbox crew that can function well in almost any environment, and because they're all armored and have a ton of access to shielded and a bunch of beneficial conditions, they can be a tough crew to take down, especially in the hands of a skilled pilot. And their flexible hiring pool makes them an ideal choice for both learning the game and for higher level tournament play.
After being summoned to Malifaux under mysterious circumstances, Victoria Chambers, carrying the legendary Masamune, had a strange encounter with a doppelganger. This neverborn creature was sent to kill her, and took on her appearance. But when Victoria struck it down with the Masamune, the magical blade had a strange effect. Victoria's memories and personality were imprinted on the doppelganger, and the strange creature joined her side, taking on the form of her twin sister. The two went on to form a mercenary organization, and gained a reputation all across Malifaux. But Victoria was becoming more and more aggressive, and when Titania the Autumn Queen re-emerged, she became the target of Victoria's anger. Unbeknownst to the mercenary, the sword she wielded was actually a prison for the tyrant Shazul, and he was fueling her anger in search of vengeance against Titania. The Victorias led their mercenaries into the Knotwoods to try to take out the Autumn Queen, but she proved to be too much of a match for them, and in the process, Victoria lost her sword. Now, the Masamune sits on Titania's throne, and though Victoria was at first distressed to be separated from the blade, now that she's out of its powerful influence, she's begun to turn back to normal. The Victorias are super interesting characters. They're 2 sword-wielding women that are kind of like ninjas, and they lead a gang of mostly female mercenaries. They've had a couple of different sculpts and art styles over the year, but I think all of them are actually pretty cool and unique looking. And because of the fact that the Victorias as a pair are the master, you actually get 2 different models on the table when you play them, the Victoria of Blood and the Victoria of Ashes. In Malifaux, my favorite crews are the types of crews that look very different and that you don't really see anything like them in other wargames, and I think the mercenary keyword really fits into that. Even though you can definitely see a lot of the influences of different characters in the crew, it looks really cool when you put it down on the table together, and I think it has a really interesting and unique look. But with that, let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how the Victorias and the mercenary keyword play in the game.
The Vics lead their mercenary crew, a crew focused on synergy and keeping up their tempo. The entire crew has the ability Battle Tempo, which allows them to push 2 inches in the start phase, which can let their models leave combat, scoot around just a little bit faster, or engage models that they were close to at the end of the turn. Although it all happens in the start phase, so it's not super overwhelming, but it is a very good tool for general positioning, and it makes Disguise super strong against melee crews. The crew has a smattering of decent enforcers. They're all very specialized for different jobs, but you will likely always be hiring LMA and the 6-arm 6-shooter, as they're just newer models that are a little bit spicier, and their henchwoman Taylor is a super fast, ruthless beater with some nasty triggers. But, much like a lot of the crew, she is a little easy to pick off. The Student of Conflict is also a very common sight in a lot of Outcast crews, because she can hand out fast to friendly models, and because she's in keyword and very inexpensive, you'll almost always see her join the mercenaries. The original Vix models are also the only double master in the game, and they can place at each other. They can chain activate, they have a ton of actions that benefit deploying both of them in the same sort of general area, like a Vix seeking missile, and back-to-back chain activating Min 3 attacking masters are usually enough to put most things into the ground. The title Vix is a single massive model who hits hard and has exceptional movement, getting to move whenever they use their melee attack, and they can move models around and clear a pretty sizable area of ski markers, at the cost of being able to draw cards from their discard pile, which in the right circumstance can turn games around. All in all, the mercenary crew is a fast and agile crew, but not so hardy, so picking your battles and using your superior speed and finesse is their way to victory.
Plague was a Fae who lived in ancient Malifaux and used his knowledge of alchemistry to seek more power. He and some of his contemporaries became known as the Tyrants, the greatest enemies of the ancient people of Malifaux, who were banished for centuries. Plague was locked in the necropolis beneath Malifaux City, in a place that was cursed, so that no one could intentionally find its location. But when an unsuspecting ratcatcher named Hamlin accidentally fell into the necropolis, he discovered Plague's resting place, and accidentally let him out. Now, the Piper, who occasionally makes appearances in the slums and serves as a herald of plague and sickness, is actually the ancient tyrant himself, wearing a disguise to look like Hamlin. As with the other tyrants, Plague is working towards ascending to a godlike state, but since being released from the necropolis, his plans have been foiled many times. Now that Titania has returned, he's set his sights on defeating the Autumn Queen, as she was partially responsible for his imprisonment in the first place. He tried to force the residents of Fryhold to do his bidding and go kill Titania, but they united against him, and after a great battle, Plague was once again defeated. But just like the other tyrants, Plague is patient, and so he'll likely go regroup and form a brand new plan. Hamlin is interesting because he's the only master in the game who is actually a tyrant himself. His crew is all themed around rats, and in Malifaux, rats are much bigger and more powerful than the ones we're used to on Earth. The rest of the stuff in the crew is all a little bit gross, and there's a little bit of body horror involved, so if that's not your thing, then maybe this isn't right for you. But if you like creepy and gross looking stuff, then Hamlin might be right up your alley. For example, you got Benny Wolcombe, who is literally wearing a cape made out of rats. So that's pretty horrible. But anyway, with that, let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how Hamlin and the Plague keyword operate in game.
Hamlin leads the Plague crew, whose sole purpose is to spread as much blight as possible. Much of the crew functions around these blight tokens, which don't do anything in and of themselves, but most models in the crew have an ability to interact with these tokens, either canceling your opponent's triggers, not allowing them to cheat, causing extra damage, or handing out all kinds of nasty conditions. Blight tokens are all around something that your opponents will do their best to avoid. This crew also shines a huge spotlight on the humble Malifaux rat. This little guy comes in droves. You can have up to 12 of them in the game at one time, and they don't really do a lot by themselves, but in addition to being summoned or demised into by more than half the models in this crew, they work as activation control for your opponent's pass tokens, which they're sure to have since you'll be summoning hordes of them, but also they can combine into the formidable Rat King, a melee beater who can put out okay damage and hamper enemy schemes. The original Hamlin is a disruption master at its best, capable of putting out a lot of damage at a pretty substantial range to models that have a lot of blight tokens, but can move and buff and give actions to nearby vermins, and blow up his own models to put more blight tokens out and damage nearby models, all while reaping the benefits of their demise abilities. Hamlin the Piper takes his disruption up to 11, with a bubble around him being basically the worst place for your opponents to be, and he can make them take actions. He does only have the ability to directly damage models that have blight tokens on them based on how many they have, but he does hand them out a lot more efficiently, and he causes all dying enemy models anywhere on the board to distribute a chunk of their blight tokens around, keeping them in the game for longer. Hamlin overall focuses on making your opponents make tough choices, giving out blight tokens that they can't do anything about, and then swarming them with hordes of vermin and the dregs of Malifaux, so that they have to either make bad choices or perish.
One of the most notable landmarks in all of Malifaux is the Hanging Tree. It's seen by everyone who enters Malifaux through the breach, a large tree where the guild hangs executed criminals. But among the bodies is one in particular that for a long time never seemed to move. It was rumored that it was impossible to cut the body down, and that occasionally it would disappear for a few hours at a time. There were also rumors that this jackdaw would sometimes lead angry groups of the dead to get revenge on those who had committed acts of betrayal. But in truth, Jackdaw was once a normal man, until he met with a fate that was worse than death. Now he can sometimes be seen roaming around the city, or defending the Hanging Tree, though no one really understands what he might want. When Kirai and Koku tried to perform a ritual to bring back her lost love, Jackdaw interfered, and it stopped her from bringing him back. But something went wrong, and now Jackdaw is changed. Jackdaw is a little bit of a mystery. We only know a little bit about his backstory, and we kind of get a little bit of a sense of what he's trying to do. But typically he's just kind of acting in the background, and he can be a threat in certain circumstances. His crew's made up of all sorts of tortured souls, including the tormented, who are literally just people being tortured. So it's definitely got a creepy and horror vibe to it. But now let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us more about Jackdaw and the Tormented keyword.
Jackdaw leads the Tormented crew, the betrayed and tortured souls of Malifaux, bent on vengeance and inflicting and inciting pain on those who deserve it. Many of the Tormented models have negative conditions or terrain that they can make, and generally give your opponent a rough time, with a particular emphasis on the staggered condition, centered around Montresor the henchman who is all about it, and the Hanged, minions who are super expensive, but attuned so they can use soul stones, and they get to treat all jokers that they flip or cheat as red, while making opponents, in opposed duels with them, treat all jokers they flip or cheat as black. There are also several models that can give out negative upgrades that debuff or cause damage to the attached model, and that have usually some sort of horrible price that the attached model can pay to discard them, either through taking damage or discarding cards, or not being allowed to cause damage to anyone during a whole activation. And nearly every model in the crew has the Torment ability, which lets them draw a card at the end of their activation if they damaged an enemy model that has an upgrade, whether it's one that they hired at the start of the game or one that you attached during it. And lastly, tons of models in his crew are terrifying. Jackdaw 1, the original Jackdaw, has the lowest health overall of any master in the entire game at 6th, but he has the unique ability to change any instance of damage suffered to 1 irreducible damage. And he has the ability to heal 1 instead of drawing a card anytime he would draw cards, as many times as he wants, so he tends to be quite durable if your opponent can't work around that. He's not technically incorporeal, but he walks and talks like a ghost, and has a scary melee attack. He can move any of his models or any enemy models that his crew has attached upgrades to with an opposed attack, and he can draw a bunch of cards if you've successfully upgraded a bunch of your opponent's crew within a small bubble. He also has the ability to hand out a bunch of slow, and his specific curse upgrade that he hands out causes the opposed model to get staggered at the start of each turn, and it doesn't actually have an exit clause like the rest of the tormented curses, so it is just there once he's given it out. Jackdaw Ensouled has a real health pool in exchange for having to take real damage normally, and he's a real ghost boy now, and makes any models he moves through has to test a pretty hefty move duel, or he gets to place them in base contact with Jackdaw after he finishes his move. His melee attack gets a glow up with an amazing trigger that lets you push 5 inches and damages anyone that it moves through unresisted, and it makes everyone that he pushes through have to test or place next to him. He also gives out a nasty upgrade that makes all enemy models treat the area within 3 of the upgraded model as hazardous 1, and that one stays until they pass a whole activation without damaging any models, itself included, which is really nasty when you stack 2 of them on models that are next to each other because they can't do anything if they don't just pass the activation. And he has an AoE push for all of his models and enemy upgraded ones, a really, really good tormented only heal or damage if you want to use it on your opponent's models, and a great ranged attack that can let him teleport to enemy models with the on your heals trigger. All in all, Jackdaw is a very, very punishing experience for your opponents, and is specialized in dismantling bubble crews, and is very, very scary, and has scary good mobility, with so many models in your crew being able to have on your heels.
Tara Blake was orphaned in her childhood, and as she grew up, she became a gun for hire, and one of the most feared residents of Malifaux. She became an expert in hunting the Neverborn, something that was normally left to the Ortegas alone, and she seemed to have a keen ability to sense the presence of the monsters. One of her jobs led her on a hunt, where she was drawn into the prison of the tyrant Obliteration. The tyrant offered her a deal, allowing her to return to the normal world with a fragment of his power. She returned with a powerful necromancer known as Karina, who had been stuck in the prison for so long that her mind was starting to slip. Upon re-emerging in Malifaux, Tara was shot in the chest by a guild sniper, but thanks to Karina's abilities, she was brought back as an undead. Unlike most undead, she was able to retain her personality, and continues to ply her trade, though under the influence of Obliteration. He wants to destroy everything, starting with his rivals, the other tyrants. And when Titania returned, he realized that she would also be a threat. When Plague tried to take over Fryhold, Tara and Obliteration were able to trap him inside of a Talos machine, a construct originally designed to contain the tyrants. But Plague was too slippery, and managed to escape their trap by cutting off a bit of his power, like a snared animal might chew off its own leg. Tara's really interesting because she seems to have all of these powers to manipulate time and reality, and that comes from her relationship with Obliteration. She's also got the hole in the center of her chest, which is always very funny to me, and she actually has an ability to avoid being shot if the bullet goes right through the hole instead of hitting her. But I know somebody else who's really fond of Tara, so let's go over to Clay from Students of Conflict for more on why he likes her.
Hi, I'm Clay from the Students of Conflict podcast. Huge thanks to DICE for inviting me to have a few words here. I got into Tara as my second master in Outcasts because I wanted something totally different, and her core mechanics are really like nothing else in the game of Malifaux, and perhaps like nothing else in any game. Lore-wise, she works with the Tyrant Obliteration, who exists in the Void, which is completely outside of time and space. And so on the table, first thing is she gets to play with just full-on Eldritch Horror models. She gets to summon Eldritch Greeblies from the Void. But she also gets to play with time and space. For time, she gets an extra activation every turn, which can be incredibly powerful. Plus, her crew hands out the fast and slow conditions in very unexpected ways. That in general, having fast on a model is a good thing if you have fast, because that model will get an extra action on its next activation. But against Tara, having fast pretty much just means that you're about to get obliterated. And then she also gets to play with space. Her crew can bury models, which is a mechanic by which you just kind of juke them off into the void, removing them from the table for a while. And then when they're in the void, she can heal friendlies, she can beat on enemy models. Her crew has all kinds of mechanics to mess with models when they're in the void. And then finally, when they get to come back on the table, it's generally exactly where the Tara player wants them. So it's some super fun mechanics. That's what got me in. I have come to find out that there's also just some fantastic lore. That Karina in particular is Tara's totem. And lore-wise, she's the most powerful resurrectionist in Malifaux. But she's been driven quite mad when she was imprisoned by obliteration. And so there's some old stories involving Karina, and she's just kind of a minor character in these stories, but they're just absolutely some of my favorite stories in Malifaux. Karina is a fantastic character. Anyways, welcome to Malifaux. I wish you the absolute best of luck and skill if you choose to play Tara. Thank you, and cheers.
Thanks so much, Clay. If you're not already listening to Students of Conflict, then definitely be sure to go check it out. I'll leave a link in the description below. It's a really great Malifaux podcast. They have a really interesting format where they interview some of the top placers in tournaments that they run and talk specifically about one game that they played. It's a really cool way to learn how to get better at Malifaux by learning from some of the top players. But with that, we'll go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us more about how Tara and the obliteration keyword play in the game.
Tara leads the tyrant-powered obliteration crew, a crew of void beasts from nowhere and timey-wimey horrors beyond our reckoning. Many of the crew's models have the stutter time bonus action, which buries the target if they're friendly and from nothing, and if it's an enemy model, they gain fast, which normally isn't a thing that you want to be giving out to your enemies, but all of the models with the from nothing ability can end any model's fast condition to unbury in base contact with a model that was fast, ending that condition and suddenly appearing out of nowhere, which can be very difficult to stop and can throw whole game plans out of whack when used correctly. Glimpse the Void is also a popular trigger on this crew's attacks, letting you temporarily bury enemy models, and many of the models in the crew can also target models that are buried, allowing you to hit the models stuck in the Void from anywhere on the table. The original flavor of Tara is a very, very fast model that blips around the board, schemes pretty good, can put out a good amount of damage, and has the Glimpse the Void trigger built into her melee attack, one of the only models in the game. And she is also a summoner who can summon any of the crew's minions, who come into play buried and ready to end the fast condition on enemy models and pop up out of nowhere. Tara also has the unique ability to take a second activation each turn. She does gain slow at the start of it, but this can be amazingly strong. And very uniquely, because she has a hole in her chest where her heart used to be, gun actions automatically fail if she gets a mask in her opposed defense duel because they go through the hole. Tara, Timeless, loses the summoning ability and trades it for a few interesting utility abilities. She can now pop buried models up near her and give them a free swing or general action. Her melee attack swaps the ability to be against defense or willpower, so that's incredibly flexible. And she gains a really interesting ability that lets her rewind models to a specific point after each activation for the rest of the turn, which is just super, super neat. All in, the obliteration crew focuses on burying, being buried, dealing with fast and slow, and is a very flexible crew overall who can literally control the pace of most battles.
Leviticus and his companion Alice are well known in Malifaux City as the proprietors of Captivating Salvage and Logistics. It's a small shop that specializes in acquiring unique items, especially things that are a bit strange or impossible. Behind the scenes, Leviticus gets up to some more controversial business, including hollowing out the minds of young women and using them to cheat death. Whenever Leviticus would die, he can use his connection to these hollow waifs to bring himself back to the land of the living. He's cheated death many times, but repeating the process has caused him to degrade, and he knows that soon he won't be able to do it anymore. When the event took place, Leviticus was visited by the four riders and began having visions about him leading them into an apocalyptic battle to save Malifaux. This seems to be a premonition of the future, but so far nothing has come of it, and Leviticus isn't sure if he cares to embrace his destiny, as his motivations are usually far more selfish. When Governor General Marlowe outlawed mercenary activity in the city, it didn't directly affect Leviticus and his shop, but he still took the opportunity to plant some roots in Freiholt, as he saw it as a good place where he could continue his experiments, where no one would bother him. Leviticus is somewhere between a necromancer and an artificer. He kind of has a steampunk vibe to most of the things in his crew, and he likes to work with both technology and undead things to create all sorts of horrible abominations. There's a little bit of body horror going on in this crew as well, with the Abominations and the Desolation Engine. But you also have Scavengers and Rusty Alice, who are more or less just people who have some mechanical augments. Leviticus himself is pretty interesting because he's very old and very powerful, and he has this ability to cheat death that's actually reflected in the game mechanics. But for more on that, let's go back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us how to play Leviticus and the Amalgam keyword.
Leviticus leads the Amalgam crew, a collection of his minions, hollowed waifs of persons, one or two loyal retainers, and a bunch of horrible abominations that cause entropy with their hideous existence. Many of the crew's models have an ability to cause damage to models who either start their activations near them or attack them, and some of the models have a very, very powerful aura to fully stop nearby models from healing, which can automatically shut off a number of abilities, including demise abilities and various other things that usually stop models from dying. Most of the models also have some sort of armor or hard to wound, and they have a great smattering of beaters, schemers in movement, and positional helping models, as well as a bit of light summoning, and one of the best abilities in the game, Tools for the Job, on Scavengers, which you'll see out of keyword a lot, but almost always one or two in a Levy crew, because they are flat out one of the best 6-stone minions in the game. Levy himself acts as one of the most oppressive beaters in the game, with the ability to cause irreducible damage, with no need to worry about his own safety, because when he dies, he can teleport to and then kill one of his 2 totems, healing in the process, making him very difficult to deal with for your opponents, and allowing him to go for the kill on targets that normally would result in your master immediately dying, like ones who thought they were safe in the middle of your opponent's crew. Leviticus Pariah of Blood gives you a completely different playstyle, allowing you to hire models in your keyword and the 4 horseman models from Neverborn Guild, Rezzers, and Arcanists, although it is at the cost of not being able to hire out of keyword non-versatile models any longer. But that's hardly even a drawback. Levy usually just hires in keyword anyway, and Levy gains a number of abilities and actions that can use the fate token mechanic that the riders possess to a similar effect, allowing him to add suits to various duels, and he has an attack that can declare multiple triggers at once. Both versions can also summon abominations, which are really annoying tar pit minions that you can have up to 8 of out at a time, and they can prevent healing and cause a bunch of damage just for being there, sometimes even from being attacked. Amalgam all in all is a great all-around crew, is very, very durable and killy, if a tad lacking in the scheme department, and is 2 very different and very flexible playstyles.
Parker Barrows came from a rich family and was supposed to inherit a fortune, but it was stolen out from under him by his brother. Parker might have been able to respect somebody who robbed him face to face, but his brother preferred to scheme, hiding behind lawyers, and doing it the cowardly way. Now, Parker leads the Barrows gang, a group of bandits and outlaws who will rob anybody who's unfortunate enough to cross their paths. They've become infamous, and the indiscriminate nature of their crimes has caused them to become hated by many powerful groups, including the Guild and the Arcanists. When mercenary work was outlawed, Parker knew it spelled trouble for him and his gang, and when VonShill invited him to Freiholt, he assumed it was a trap. But all the other mercenaries were in a difficult spot as well, so Parker could see the benefit of teaming up with the rest of them. Eventually, Parker had a chance encounter with Zip the Sky Pirate, and the two went off on their own misadventures, including trying to steal the hanging tree right out from under the Guild's nose. Eventually, Parker was captured by the Guild, and on the day he was set to be executed, the Burning Man arrived, and Parker found himself under its influence. He survived the noose, and took a bit of revenge on the Guild, before setting out to continue his bandit lifestyle. Parker and the bandit crew definitely fit into the sort of Wild West gunslinger aesthetic. Malifaux kind of has a reputation for being Western themed, but I don't think it's actually true for most crews, but Parker is definitely one that you'll like if you're into that type of thing. Almost everybody in his crew is going to have a 6-shooter or a shotgun, and most of them have a leather duster and some boots and chaps. The exception is Doc Mitchell, who is sort of an unwilling member of the group, who was originally sort of conscripted, but now it's sort of ambiguous whether he follows along with them willingly or not. The crew even has a bunch of mechanics that make them more effective at being gunfighters than a lot of other crews, and their mechanics also tie into this idea that they're bandits and thieves, which I think is really cool and flavorful. But for more on that, we're going back over to Brandon, who's going to tell us about how Parker and the bandit crew plays.
Alright, Parker Barrows leads the ragtag, train rubbin', no good bandit crew, a crew focused on scheming and gunning. Nearly every model in the crew has the ability Run and Gun, which lets them put bullets downrange after a charge action instead of having to use their fists, which offers a significant amount of flexibility and maneuverability that most crews don't have. They also have access to a ton of the fast condition, usually from their Life of Crime ability, which lets them remove nearby ski markers when they activate, to gain the condition. And a lot of their attacks have the drop it trigger, which do just that. Drop scheme markers of the enemies near the model that they shot. It would be improper to not mention one of the best henchmen in the game, Mad Dog Brackett, who is at home in the Bandit crew, and you see him a ton out of keyword, so you're definitely going to see him when the Bandit crew comes to bear. And he has one of the absolute best guns known to Malifaux. The original version of Parker Barrows has a decent gun attack, a ranged willpower attack that makes your opponents decide either to get shot or give up the goods, in this case cards, allowing them to discard cards to take less damage, but then you get to draw cards for each one they discarded. And he lets you move your models around and then take a shot. He also gets a massive bonus from being near a pile of enemy ski markers, because he can remove all of the markers near him with a bonus action to either draw cards or add soul stones to his cache for every one removed. So setting up fields of enemy ski markers with your drop it triggers will lead to enormous payoffs. Parker Barrows' Deadman Walking, on the other hand, is more of a controlled damage dealer. He pulses out damage to enemies whenever a ski marker is dropped in his line of sight, either through their actions or your crew's drop it triggers. And he has 2 different actions that move models and markers around, handing out conditions, and his bonus action changes how the drop it trigger works on any models that he targets with his bonus action, causing it to happen even if the attack that caused the trigger fails for the rest of the turn. The Bandit crew overall has a good mix of movement and damage, so they can be very, very flexible, if somewhat fragile, and they have some of the best pun models in the entire game, and they're a nightmare to play against if you have to drop ski markers for any reason.
Long ago, Captain Zip got his hands on an Aethervox and spent his time listening to stories of grand adventure. Since then, he's fancied himself a pirate, and he began his career robbing caravans, but he knew that he was destined for greatness. Soon after, he took his band of gremlin bandits, known as the Iron Skeeters, and stole a guild airship, which he renamed the Infamy. Now, the Iron Skeeters are the terrors of the skies, and Zip takes every opportunity to deliver a proper monologue, so that the victims he robs will help spread his reputation. Then one day, Zip bumped into one of his idols, Parker Barrows, and their 2 respective crews were fast friends. The 2 decided to set out on their most daring heist yet, to steal the hanging tree right out from under the guild's nose. Zip is one of my favorite characters in the whole Bayou. He's kind of like a cartoon villain. He's all about showboating and making sure that he spreads his reputation as a ruthless villain, hence the keyword infamous. Him and his crew have all sorts of flashy technology, including jetpacks, lightning guns, and iron skeeters. So it's probably no wonder that he's also teamed up with Mancha Roja and a bunch of wrestlers. They probably appreciated his over-the-top antics and his love for a monologue. But now again, let's go over to Doug, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about how you play Zip in game.
Oh, Captain Zip, greatest sky goblin pirate of all time. Zip is awesome. He has 2 modes. In his first mode, he's really fast. He moves 8. He's got a chatty aura, which is just a 6-inch aura that says that models have to discard a card to take interact actions around him. He's got a lot of really, really interesting abilities, mostly around displacement and creating terrain on the board. His big thing is that he can throw these really annoying 40mm height 3 blocking destructible pianos everywhere. So effectively, he drops pianos out of his skyship onto his enemies. And then on top of that, he's got a really strong ray gun that both ignores cover and concealment and can do really solid blast damage if your opponent decides to bunch up. And then the last big trick that I always love using with Zip is he has Up We Go, so he himself can do really, really, really interesting kidnaps. I have personally seen Sam kidnap Ivan from 15 inches away, dump him off into his deployment zone, and have Macharoa beat Ivan to death with this at a tournament. It is very, very possible to do in a practical competitive game, and the Zip kidnap is very, very real. Basically, you're chaining Up We Go attacks together with the mask triggers to consistently push the model wherever you want it. The other version of Zip is Zip as a dread pirate. So he's not really dropping pianos much anymore. He still flies. He's got a little bit of a different loadout. Now he can do a can't fire the cannons trick, which is damaging shockwaves, and you can reduce the value of the shockwave to increase the damage. He can do some interesting stuff with his cutlass or his attack, which allows him to do a captain's challenge, which is until the end phase, enemy models other than the model that he's targeting with his sword suffer a neg flip to actions targeting him. So he has a weird defensive scenario going on. One of the other things that I should mention is innate to the infamous keyword is showboating. Showboating is when you cheat, you get to draw a card at the end of the model's activation. So a big thing with these guys is cheating down if you know that you're not going to hit a TN or win a duel anyway, just so that you can replace the card and get another card out of it. And then Zip also has some of my favorite models in his keyword. He's got the First Mate, which is a Silurid with a giant anchor, and he's got Mancha Roja, who's this giant wrestler, this roided up goblin wrestler who's there to just crongle people over the head with other goblin wrestlers. He's pretty cool.
Tiri was only a child when the tyrant Sharufe turned his wrath on his own people, the Awa. They were a species of the Fae, who were known for building machines and weapons, many of which were used to fight the tyrants. They were almost completely destroyed by Sharufe, who left their civilization in ruins. To make matters worse, he also put a curse on the Awa that would cause their skin to turn to ash when they weren't in the presence of heat. As her people have died off over the years, Tiri has risen to become their leader, and when the Burning Man returned to Earth, all the Awa sensed the presence of their old nemesis. Tiri then led them back to Malifaux City to try to find Sharufe and potentially put an end to the curse. She's led her people to recover some of their weapons and artifacts from ancient times, and upon returning to the city, she made contact with the Explorer Society, who was interested in finding out what the Awa had to offer. Tiri is the newest master for the Explorer Society, and she's very unusual. This is the first time we've really seen the Awa, and they're very alien-looking and have all kinds of strange technology that isn't like anything else we've seen in Malifaux. So suffice it to say, it's extremely cool. Now, because the Awa were known for their technology and their building of constructs, a lot of the things in her crew are mechanical or have some sort of strange and cool technology. And then you got Parson, who's got a relic hammer, and relic hammers are always cool. But with that, one more time, let's go back over to Sam, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how Tiri and the Bygone keyword operate in the game.
Tiri is very cool. She's the newest master from Madness of Malifaux. Tiri's got two abilities that are really key to her crew. The first is the Ideal. Now, that's an upgrade that is attached to you rather than one of your models, and it has two sides, tradition and technology. Every model in her keyword has some abilities that are tradition locked and some abilities that are technology locked. The models that have an ability that's locked to tradition, as long as the tradition side of your card is face up, you can use that ability. But the other abilities don't even exist. They're treated as though they're not even printed on your card. So sometimes that's front of card abilities, sometimes it's triggers, but they all tend to be very strong abilities. So you really have to plan which of them you're going to have access to. She's also got Scars of Charuf, which is a keyword ability they share, which is that if they start their activation with the shielded condition, in any amount of shielded, they're treated as having a tome built in on all their duels for that activation. And they have some really strong tome triggers usually, so the ability to build in those triggers is great. So Tiri is really about buffing models. She has a pretty cool ranged attack that does consistent damage, although it's not that high. But she's very strong. She has good card draw. She can move models around, cycle cards in her hand out fast, hand out shielded, hand out focused. She's really about buffing your models and putting the right model in the right place. And she's got some pretty scary beaters like the Iron Matron, and even Parson has some substantial ability to deal damage if he's in tradition mode, because your opponent cannot cheat fate when they're targeted by his attacks, and he's got a 3/4/5 hammer that ignores shielded. Tiri the Architect is kind of the other half of this equation, and she's very interesting. She's not really as much of a buffer as the original Tiri, although she has some ability to buff. She has a strong attack that not only does some damage, but also turns off your opponent's healing for the whole turn, as long as you so much as hit them. And she also has these really cool lost technology markers, which are sort of things she can dredge up out of the sands once per turn. She can summon one of these markers, and it's a technology marker that your opponent can't remove using normal marker removal techniques. And it has abilities, like usually aura abilities that are buffs or debuffs, and what the marker does exactly varies depending on whether you're in tradition mode or technology mode. So some of the markers have effects like Gravity Well. There's one that lets your models, when they start a move, ignore models in terrain, kind of like they're flying. There's one that turns off your opponent's ability to spend focus, one that gives your models the equivalent of Don't Mind Me. Lots of really cool buffs and debuffs. So a lot of playing Tiri the Architect is just figuring out what buffs you need and having the right marker in the right place.
Well, that is it for the Outcasts and consequently this entire series. I want to send a huge thank you to Clay from the Students of Conflict. Be sure to check out their podcast. It'll be linked in the description below. And as always, I want to thank the guys from the Danger Planet for helping out throughout this whole series. They've been awesome. Make sure you check out their channel if you aren't already subscribed. I also want to thank everybody who ever sent in a picture for this series. I think it's been a great addition to the videos to show off different people's paint styles instead of just looking at my own and some of the weird art. So huge shout out to all of them. Some of them have Instagrams and they'll be linked in the description as well. Now this series is over, but I plan to start up a new series pretty soon that is going to be aimed at helping new players getting into the game, so be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what I have coming up. And I want to send a huge thank you to the extremely cool kids here on Patreon, the Steam Pound Scoundrels, Dogmatize, Devin, and Spill Paint Pod. And thanks for watching.